Welcome to Sustainable Packaging Podcast with Cory Connors, brought to you by Landsberg Aurora. I'd like to welcome my very good friend today, Mr. Evelio Mattos.
Hey, Cory, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on my show. You and I have developed a really great relationship over social media and all the things that we do. We'll get into that. But Evelio, you're the creative director of packaging. You're the founder and host of two podcasts. One of my favorite is Package Design Unboxed. Absolutely an amazing podcast. Tell us about yourself, man. How did you get started as a designer in this world?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. You're right. I do Package Design Unboxed, and then also have a packaging podcast. Um, I started, long ago, man. I was a kid growing up. My dad would illustrate, do tons of great illustrations. He taught me how to draw. I love drawing.
Awesome.
Growing up, I wanted to be a chef, which was kind of weird. But my dad worked in restaurants and hotels, and I was always in the kitchen. And that was like, my life was geared towards that. And I always drew. As I got older, I spent a lot of time in restaurants. And then I realized, even though I was really passionate about cooking and cooking for people, I didn't like cooking for money. Like, that just ruined it,
Interesting. Yeah.
So I was in the Marine Corps. I was drawing out tattoos for people. I was doing t-shirts for different units. And I said, I'm just going to lean into this, illustrating thing, and I got a job at a design agency where I would do everything from like get coffee to make copies, just to be in that environment. And then one day they're like, hey, we've got to do this big invitation for this big event that they're having. It was like big, I can't remember what it was, like this big Ferrari thing where they drive, I don't know, like 50 or 60 Ferraris up and down the coast. I think like Mario Andretti, heads up the whole thing. And they're like, we've got all this stock art that we're going to use. I'm like, can you do something better? And I'm like, yeah, I went home. I had like a glass kitchen table, and I put my lamp underneath it, and I used it as like a light board. I came back in the next morning, and I'd drawn out all these different car options, and every single one of them got used. And then seeing those out like in the market in Southern California it was exciting. And at that point I was hooked. I'm like, all right, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And, I went to, I spent some time at art school, spent some time working at different companies, and I really focused on illustrating. So I was working at U-Haul in Arizona, where they do those big, huge graphics on the sides of the vehicle. Yeah. And I was working in the art department, and my friend Steve is the illustrator behind those amazing graphics. So together with him, I learned a ton. And they were launching a new product that it was software, and it required a box, and nobody wanted to do a box. So I'm like, I'll do it. I'll figure it out. And I cut up this box, I built it, and I, did the graphics and, collaborated with a couple of the crew members. And once the thing hit the market, again, I was hooked.
That's so cool.
Right. It's like, I could see it. I could call, my friends, my parents, whoever, and go, hey, go to the store. I made this entire box, like the way that the front opens, the way that, it messages you throughout that entire experience. Like, that was all, concepted and developed by me and the team that I was with. And it just felt great. So at that point, I'm like, all right, illustration's great, but unless I'm going to be, illustrating, being an illustrator is amazing, but it's really not that easy. It's really hard to make a living as a full-time illustrator. And packaging was just such a new thing that I just jumped into it, and there wasn't anybody out there really doing anything special. So that's kind of how I fell into packaging. And that was, 15, 16 years ago. I've been hooked since.
Well, thank you for your service as a Marine. We do appreciate that, and as an American. And I think that's a really cool story about how you drew tattoos, and how I didn't know that. That's really cool. I know you've actually even started a few agencies. Do you want to kind of speak to those a little bit and tell us about how you've grown them? And
yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I know, like, one of the things that I did after leaving U-Haul and building my own, I built my own agency out of my house. I kind of grew that to a great place. After that point, I was asked to join a packaging distributor, right? So this company was a small company here in Arizona, and they bought packaging from different vendors, and they would resell it. And, there's just a lot of these companies out there in the country. right? There's a lot of little small mom and pop resellers. And these guys asked me to come on, like, hey, you know, we don't have an art department. We don't do a lot of creative, and we're just designing, or we're just producing what the brands are telling us. You know, can you come on board and kind of and build something for us, like help us build this design studio? And, you know, I took that challenge on. I spent 12 years building out this small mom and pop shop into, you know, a globally recognized design agency.
Wow.
And, you know, that was amazing. So I was working with cosmetics and fashion brands and just, you know, just some really amazing brands. And throughout the entire process, you know, I learned so much from the clients that I was working with, but also from the manufacturing partners that they had, you know, all the different factories, all of the, you know, different product suppliers. And, you know, I really got into the production side of it. And I just loved it.
Yeah.
Right. Cause you can solve and design amazing packaging if you understand the entire production process. So just geeking out on that was amazing. And one of the things that I learned was the fact that a lot of the agencies that would come to this distributor for support, they were looking for like structural support. They're like, hey, we've got great branding, we're launching this new brand for this client, but you know, how can we develop new packaging? How can we develop new structures? And just realizing that there was nobody out there selling like white label structures. So
Right.
yeah, so I built out a separate agency, an in-house, you know, I was more of an entrepreneur. So it was like building out an entire separate company for this distributor.
Hmm.
And all that department did was just build out structures and just focused on user experience. At the time, I'd been editor-in-chief of the dieline.com. I'd been, you know, an editor for those guys for a long time. They asked me to be the editor-in-chief for a little bit. And, you know, having that access to all these agencies, all these wonderful teams around the world, again, it was everybody needed structure and nobody was talking about it. So I really leaned into that. And it was just it was a great learning experience. It was definitely grew as a professional, you know, having built out an agency for the distributor and then also building out a separate agency for, you know, for structure. It was amazing. Then, you know, after that, I went and I worked for a company called Veritiv. Those guys are gigantic, a behemoth, you know, people know them mostly for facilities and some other stuff they do, but they're, you know, a large packaging manufacturer. And those guys had seen the two agencies that I built and how those have grown through social. You know, they went from like 0 followers to, you know, 20,000 followers in a matter of time on, you know, different platforms. I'd released 2 books. They were called Packaging and Die Lines 1 and Packaging and Die Lines 2.
Oh.
And those books, you know, had like 3 million down individually, which were crazy. And just, you know, all these different marketing techniques that I built to really just for myself, because I thought they were so much fun. You know, if I was a student, I would want somebody to give me this information. So I built out that information. And, you know, Veritiv was like, we want to build an in-house agency. We want you to do the same thing you did here in here. So with the team of people, you know, I built that out. And I don't want to say I built that out because it feels like it was all me. It was an entire team, but I was part of that process, right? Like, here's the vision. Here's how we do it. Here's how you create a proposal. Here's how you phase out this packaging process. You know, here's the types of things you want to ask up front. Here's how you onboard a client. Here's how you, like, all those little details that go into actually building out an agency that isn't just creative. Right. It's all the everyday things. I came on and I built that out. Once that was launched and ready and live, I handed that off and I left and kind of went on my own.
It seems like you're really best on your own. You've found your niche, and your work in the high-end packaging industry is world renowned. And I'm not saying that just because you're my friend. I'm saying that because you are world renowned as one of the top packaging designers. And so kudos to you for all of your history and everything that you've built. It's really awesome.
Thanks. Yeah. And so like now I'm working, you know, I'm helping out, you know, I'm collaborating with a company called IDP. They're a sponsor on the podcast, and those guys work with some amazing brands. And what's interesting with those guys is like they're a factory direct manufacturer. So coming from the distributor world, yep, where you're going out and trying to find the cheapest manufacturer in order to build a margin, working with a factory that actually produces the packaging and there's like no, distributor model. It's really interesting. So I've learned a ton, collaborating with those guys, and then just working with like some startups, learning a lot about myself.
Yeah.
I love the ramp up phase, right? Where there's like, what are the ideas? How are we going to get this in the market right away? I love that phase. Same thing with ideas, right? Working with an existing large brand, but they're like, okay, we're going to pivot. We want to move into sustainable packaging. And there's like this big ramp up phase, like looking at materials, looking at processes, looking at design capability, looking at, all the different things that make sustainable packaging a reality. Like, I love that part. Once the system is in place and packaging is being produced and they want to change a small detail,
right,
you lost me.
Yeah. You like to do the hard part. In most people's eyes, that's the most difficult part, is starting from a paper napkin at a bar stool and going to actual fruition.
I see that as the easy part. I see the tedious,
you're good at it.
I see the tedious side as the hard part. It's just so difficult to get up in the morning and go like, oh my God, I got to look at that same box one more time. And I got to rewrite the ingredients panel. Right.
Yeah. Make the 35th flavor. Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So big question for you. This podcast is about sustainable packaging. Mm-hmm. Can packaging be sustainable?
Yeah, I think, you and I were having a little conversation before we started recording, and absolutely packaging can be sustainable. We're looking at just so many new materials that are coming on the market. And I think the most difficult thing, or the obstacle that brands face in becoming, delivering sustainable packaging, is confusion and almost too much information out there. And what I mean by that is there's a million different materials that are coming on market. There's a new one that I read about. It was like, there are enzymes built into the plastic so that when, there's a certain amount of water and a certain amount of temperature, the plastic begins to break down at a molecular level, which sounds great, but there's no infrastructure to collect that and to process that separately. So, if a brand wants to use that plastic because it has this great story, awesome. And that company that's making that plastic will grow, and that's great for them. But at the end of the day, when a consumer gets that plastic bottle, they're going to throw it in the recycle bin. They're going to throw it in with their plastics. It's going to go to a recycling plant, and it's going to process with just regular old PET bottles. And what, on the consumer side, they're like, all right, well, plastic bottle is a plastic bottle. How can that damage things? But you're weakening the entire system. You're delivering a product that's meant to break down into a system that isn't meant to break down. And I think that's the biggest challenge. Having a conversation with a client this morning, it's like, yes, there's a million of these materials out there, but because recycling is a business, they have to make money. You've got to look at what they're able to sell. They're able to resell paper, corrugate, cardboard, they're able to sell PET, and really beyond those materials, you're not going to find very much. Some, like in Florida, a lot of recyclers, they'll recycle plastics 1 through 7, wow, which is amazing. But across the country, typically you're only going to get recycling in like 1, 2, maybe. So maybe again,
5,
yeah. Right. It's not, it's not across the board. It's not, everybody doesn't do the same thing. So trying to really keep your product and your packaging materials to a minimum, makes sense. Sticking with the stuff that actually gets recycled makes sense. Seeing all these great products that are coming on the market is awesome. But until the infrastructure is there to actually support those, it's hurting the system versus helping the system.
Yeah.
So can we get recyclable? Can packaging be sustainable? Absolutely. We just have to stop looking for the next big thing. We have to focus on what works now and just really lean into that.
Yeah, let's eliminate greenwashing and let's actually make packaging out of stuff that's easy to recycle.
Yeah.
and tell the customers and the people like us out there that care, here's how you recycle it. I think that's it.
Yeah. It's not sexy. That's the problem.
Well,
it's back to basics.
We're trying to make it sexy, right? Yeah, that's us.
People know how to get in shape, right?
Yeah.
Don't eat so much and do some sit-ups.
Yeah.
But everybody's out there looking for the next big thing. I've got to get this app. I've got to get this, this belt. I got to get this, hat, whatever it is that they've got to do. Just, stick to the basics and it works. And that's the same with sustainability.
I totally agree. I'm excited about the future of packaging. I think we can do this together if we all work towards that mission.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to talk to you about something that you and I are both, I think, big fans of, and that's reusable packaging or circular economy concepts. Do you think those will be a large part of the future of packaging?
I think so. I do like the idea of reusable packaging. I mean, a lot of the stuff that in a lot of the brands and industries that I work, reusable is used incorrectly. So with fashion brands and luxury brands, reusable packaging means it's their same box, but because it's such a high-end brand or it's such a nice box, people are going to reuse it. And it's always, oh, I want people to put their jewelry in here, or I want people to put their sweaters in here.
Keepsake, right?
Yeah, this keepsake pack. How many items how many boxes can you actually keep? Right? How much room do you actually have to store these things? And I always say, like, on a long enough timeline, this stuff is going to go to the landfill. So what happens at end of life? Let's design for that. But when we're talking about like truly reusable packaging, like the loop system, like some of these that you have shared with like the wine companies that are, you send back that packaging, all those solutions are great solutions and they really make sense. They pay for themselves after a certain amount of use. That's the one thing, right? It just depends on each one. They may pay back within 30 uses, sometimes like 100 uses. There's the grocery bag totes that you get at the grocery store, right? The reusable totes. You got to use those like 300 times before they actually make a difference. And by like the 10th time, somebody's always buying the next reusable tote, or you're going to a store that hands you a new reusable tote. I've got like 30 reusable totes, hidden in a closet somewhere, because you just get so many of them that you just can't reuse. So again, it's like, will that system be beneficial? Will it be a part of the future? Absolutely. Are there brands that are overdoing it? 100%. And they're the ones that kind of screw it up for the rest of us, right? They screw up that system.
I agree. I do like the idea of like Haagen-Dazs in Europe with the reusable ice cream, container. I think that's really cool. So we'll see where that goes. I'm excited about it. So what tips would you give a new packaging designer, as someone who's been through the ringer and earned your stripes? What would you tell somebody new starting? What should they focus on? What should they learn to be sustainable in packaging?
Yeah, absolutely. So anybody that's starting out in packaging, there's a lot,
Right. It's a big question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a huge question. First, it's just about passion, right? Focusing on the user experience, focusing on end of life. Like those are the two areas that you really need to focus on. Don't worry so much about the graphics. Don't worry so much about, I don't know. There's like this thing that always goes through my head when I talk to young designers and they're like, I'm attending a community college, but I want to get into packaging and I'm never going to get to this level because I'm not attending art center or I'm not attending, MSU or Clemson or whatever packaging school or design school they feel is, has an advantage. And, I always tell them, look, if you're passionate about this, if you feel that this is where you want to focus, it doesn't matter what school you go to. I've seen plenty of resumes from students from these schools that don't hold a candle to you. So, it's about you. It's the student, not the school. So yeah, focus on, the user experience. That's one area that a lot of packaging designers are going to fail because they're focusing so much on the graphics. How is this going to look in my portfolio?
Right.
Versus how is this going to compete on shelf? And, what competes on shelf may not be the most beautiful pack that you could have designed, but it's the most effective. And that's the case for sustainability. It may not be this groundbreaking innovation. It just might be the right solution. It might just be something that fulfills faster, has a good unboxing experience and is smaller than it was before, using materials that are easily recyclable. It's not sexy, right? It's what works. And packaging isn't this art form that's, that's displayed at the MoMA. It's something that's got to make money and be recyclable. And if you can focus on those two things, you'll have a great career in packaging. You know, being sustainable, making sure that your pack assembles properly. Like this is, you know, like I've got there's a Beard Papa near me. I don't know if you're familiar with these guys.
No.
At Beard Papa, they do cream puffs.
Oh, cool.
And delicious cream puffs. But you know, I got this box because, you know, the outside graphics, no big deal. It's yellow with this blue face. You know, it's like a gabled style box, but you know, it has an auto lock bottom. But the interior of this thing, I love it. You know, and the truth is I built the box with a similar bottom construction years ago, but I could not remember how to build this die line. And I've been racking my brain. And then I went to Beard Papa and I got a cream puff and I opened it up, and lo and behold, it has a full bottom panel in the auto lock construction. So I'm like, all right, give me 2 more boxes. Yeah. So it's like this auto lock, and it has this full panel on the inside, which is great because it just gives you full coverage. You don't see the openings, you don't see all the folds. And it's like something as simple as that, which is not a difficult solution. It's something that you can come up with that can make a difference in a user's experience, whether it's the consumer or the staff member at the store. You know, right. Those are the things that matter. That's what makes packaging work. And
they're not going to fall out of the bottom as they go home. Right.
Yeah. And you're not going to leave a crummy mess on your car seat or wherever. But yeah, and it's a great solution. It's using a C1S board, fully recyclable. And again, it's not groundbreaking, but it's effective.
Right. I love that. Well, how do we get a hold of you, Evelio? What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, anybody wants to talk to me, if you're a student going through school and you're interested in learning more about packaging, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions. If you're a young designer, I get these calls quite a bit. They're like, you know, I'm a designer 2. I want to get to a designer 3. You know, how can I go about it? Or I've even had a conversation with several designers where they're like, I'm getting a promotion and they're offering me a 3% bonus. You know, here's what I've done for the last 2 years. Does that make sense? And these are people that I've never met in my life. And I'm happy to have that call and that conversation with them, because sometimes you just want to know. Sometimes you just want to bounce that off of somebody and kind of learn where you're at. Or if you're a brand and you're looking for new packaging, new concepts, new development, want to know how to make something, looking for a manufacturer that can make something, you know, reach out to me. And I think the best way that you can find me is you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm there all day, you know, so it's Evelio Mattos, or you can find me on any of the social platforms, and that is at Evelio Mattos. I use it the same for all social, you know, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere, but I'm on LinkedIn daily. So if you want to find me on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Evelio. I appreciate you.
Yeah, Cory, man, thank you so much for having me on here. I really appreciate it. It's been great to get to know you and build this, build this little community that we're growing. Love it.
You too, my friend. You can also find us on Clubhouse once a week. We host a weekly room with Adam Peak, Wednesdays, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard. So that's another place.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, man.